Hello everyone, my name is David Smith and I'm the Chief Officer of the UK charity 15Square. 15Square was formed about 25 years ago by Dr. John Warren, and it was a charity intending to help men who had been damaged physically or psychologically by circumcision. For the last 10 years we've had a close working relationship with Keele University, and in particular the medical school. And we've been part of the student initiative where second year medical students spend some time on placement with charities. And we hope by working with medical schools we will be able to raise better awareness, stimulate discussions within medical schools, and hopefully their future careers will lead them into a direction where they'll be able to inform policy. So last year I was pleased to say we had a record 11 students. And I'm going to introduce one of our placements from last year, and I'm going to start by asking him to give a brief introduction to himself and to tell us why he chose the placement.
So I'm a Year 3 medic student, and I chose 15Square simply because it's been a topic that I've been interested in for some time, mainly from an ethical and moral point of view. And it was just great to have an opportunity to help out. I had no idea that such a charity existed on my doorstep, and it didn't really feel like work either. It felt like just contributing to something that I've always kind of believed in.
How do you think this subject fits in with what's taught about medical ethics?
I think it's a really, really interesting one. There's so many issues where it comes to consent and autonomy, and then you have this issue which seems to just fly against everything that you're taught about it, and it's quite shocking. And I think most of all, the thing that jumps out at me was, even if you push these ethical issues aside about the kind of immediate, do we circumcise or not, there's also all the long-term effects of it which people aren't consenting to, and it's easy to forget those elements when thinking about the bigger picture.
I think that's an interesting answer, thank you. Yeah. Having been on the placement, what surprised or shocked you the most?
So I think in terms of what surprised me, it would be the international audience and kind of base of service users that 15Square has. It's definitely not just British people that I see contact yourselves. It's people from all over the world who feel equally as abandoned by medical professionals, or even within religious circles, they feel abandoned within that and they have no one else to turn to. So it's been really surprising to see how wide the scope is of service users. In terms of what shocked me, it would probably be the severe distress that it can have on people, whether that's the immediate aftermath of a circumcision, or it's further down the line when they've realised what's happened to them, or they've started to encounter adverse effects as a result of the operation that they hadn't anticipated before. And yeah, it takes a really big mental toll on some of these men, and it can be really shocking to know that men take their lives as a result of this. And thankfully not every man in this situation does take their own lives, but there's been many men who I've seen the encounters with, and they've definitely been pretty close to calling it quits on everything as a result of this. And yeah, you kind of forget that people can be pushed that far as a result of what they initially felt was maybe just a very simple operation.
I think what you said is quite interesting, because I've been involved in this right from the start, and I've dealt with some very sad cases myself, and I'm aware of at least 4 men who've taken their own lives. In one case it wasn't only the man, it was the guy who'd had the circumcision, but he died in a joint suicide pact with his mother. She couldn't, when she found out what had happened to her son, neither of them could live with it, and they took their own lives. We have a wonderful ambassador, Leslie Roberts, whose son took his own life. He had a circumcision at 21, and he just couldn't stand he was not told about the consequences, and he knew that what had happened to him was very difficult to live with, and he took his own life at 23. He left a very detailed suicide note, which is unusual. I mean, in some of the ones we've had before, they haven't left any note, and it's very easy to dismiss the circumcision. But I think in his case, in Alex's case, it was very detailed, and nobody could dispute what he said. And his mother went on. His last wish was that his story was told, and his mother has written a book, A is for Alex. I would recommend anybody to read that book. It's a very difficult read, because I mean it's mostly about suicide prevention, but it also is a story of why he took his own life. Yes, this really is an awful thing that affects a lot of men, and even those that don't take their own lives, they have a lot of psychological issues supporting it, and it's difficult. I mean, sometimes I think I'm never going to see a worse case, and then I do. But hopefully things are changing as more information comes out. We are encouraging men to tell their stories. We have a vast amount of stories in our archive that people have given their consent to do this. And our hope is that these stories will be used to raise awareness of this issue, so that we can get them published. And apart from the medical aspect, there's a great psychological damage, and we hope that that's going to be addressed soon. We are starting to make inroads into this. I did a training session with Mind. The Mind, for those of you who are not aware, is a major counselling charity in the UK, and I think they're probably one of the leaders. And in that training session, I made a comment that our issue breaks every rule in the book, and the trainer said, would I stay on the call afterwards? It's a Zoom call. And she said to me afterwards, I know all about female circumcision, but I have never ever given a thought to what happens to males. She said, and what you said, it is now obvious that there is an issue there, and Mind have asked me if I will give training sessions to their counsellors, and I think that's a real breakthrough. And things are happening on the medical side. We've recently, there's been a report in one of our major newspapers. A urologist in Liverpool has Alderhay Children's Hospital, which is one of the leading hospitals in the UK, and they have now admitted that there are far too many circumcisions happening. So the medical side is coming out, but I want to go more into the psychological side now, because I think this is an area that really is it's on the research basically, and it needs to be. So hopefully we can get some input in that. Next question I was going to ask you, as a small charity supporting a specialist need, do you think we should be doing anything differently, and where do you think we can improve?
I think it's very difficult to criticise such a small charity. You guys do so much, you support so many men, and to ask you to do any more would be stretching yourselves too thin, potentially. I feel that unless there was more funding for a charity like 15Square and a bigger base of people willing to put themselves out there and do the necessary work, then I can't really ask any more of yourselves. You guys do so much.
Well, we are we're sort of restructuring at the moment, because obviously when an organisation's been in existence for as long as we have, you sometimes have to stop and think, where are we now and where do we want to be? So at the moment we're doing a lot of work on restructuring, making sure we've got policies in place we want to encourage volunteers, but we want to encourage volunteers with skills so that they can help move us forward. I mean, obviously there are only very few of us actually working officially for 15Square. The equivalent to two, really, if you count two part-time and one full-time. So I think our output is considerable, really. But we really need quite a few more, but we can hopefully fill that gap initially with volunteers, and then I think the subject is now suitably out there that we can possibly apply for some official funding. But there again, funding takes some time. When you think of other charities, they have a full-time funding officer just to raise enough to keep the charity going. So it's a big issue. But one of the things that I have also learned is that, and I went on a training course last week, and it's mental health first aid. And what was interesting, they were talking about anybody who has a mental health problem. The first thing that the first aider should do is be alert to the problem. Then they listen without making any judgment. Then they give advice. And it's said that some of the things that an organisation like ours can do, and one of the best services, is to give people who are suffering just a voice, basically, or an opportunity to share their stories with other people. And we run a whole series of support meetings called Together Not Alone. They're very interesting meetings, actually. No two are ever the same. Sometimes nobody wants to talk, in which case I spend the time thinking, what the heck do I say next? And sometimes the floodgates open and you can't stop people. And they've said that is probably all that some people need, just to recognise that they're not alone with their problem. The issue we face is where do you go from there? Because if somebody is past that stage, they really need some professional help. First of all, they have to go to their doctor, and very often the doctor will just dismiss them. There is a circular logic to this. My colleague has done he's done an interesting diagram on a circular logic, in that people go and say, I've been damaged by this procedure, and the doctor said, well, nobody's ever complained before. And it's a circular logic, because then it's not recorded, so the next person, there's no history, and very often it's dismissed. So even if a guy gets as far as going to a doctor, and if he gets a referral to further treatment, very often that is also the psychologist counsellor doesn't understand the specific damage. The men are wary, and very often that doesn't go well, so they really are alone, which is why I think we need more work on the psychological damage. And as I said earlier, I hope this is what's going to happen in the future. But I think it's really interesting that what you said and in some of your questions. The other thing that I think you commented to me, and you said even if circumcision stopped now, we would still need to be in existence for 80 years in some form or other.
It's very easy to forget that, if that milestone, we ever reach that milestone, that landmark day of circumcision being banned, okay, we can open the champagne and celebrate, but there's still many, many men who still need that support ongoing. It doesn't stop the moment that non-therapeutic circumcision is banned. There's still men that need your help.
Yes, I hope to be there to open the champagne on the day it does end. I doubt whether I shall be around in another 80 years to still be doing this job. But I think it's really interesting. I've seen a step change even since the pandemic, strangely. I think it's opened up more avenues to us, because going online, Zoom in particular, because we've been able to run more events online, whereas originally we held events in person. And we are based in the middle of the UK. So it's fairly easy to get to us from most parts of the UK, north, south, east and west. And when we used to run meetings, very often people would come from extreme parts. We even had people flying over from Ireland to take part in our meetings. So that gives you some indication of the trauma these men are going through. And from all over. But the one thing about Zoom is we're able to cater for a much wider audience. And I've noticed, on the last meeting that we had one attendee from Australia, one from America, and two from Switzerland. So it's as you say, it is. We seem to be picking up a number of service users from all over the place, and I think a lot of people are actually concentrating on the protesting circumcision and trying to get it stopped. But it seems to me that very few are actually helping the people who are actually damaged. Person-centered. I think that's the name of it. The other interesting aspect to our work is that when we first started, we were only started to help circumcise men, and we then went on to, we were suddenly started to be contacted by men who were intact. They'd still got their foreskins, but they got a problem with them. And they knew that if they went to a doctor, that they would probably say, a quick circumcision. So they rather live with the problem than the solution. I think when we first started, most of our inquiries were circumcised men. Now they are from intact men, because as there are fewer circumcised men as circumcisions died down. There are fewer circumcised men, more intact men, and I think it still alarms me that men go to their doctors, and quite often the doctor will still say that circumcision is the only course of treatment. So I think that's going to be interesting for you and your fellow students as medical students on how this is raised, and this is an area, and obviously when you qualify, I think obviously you will have probably more knowledge than your colleagues on this. So I think anybody going to you will be very well looked after.
No, just to pick up on your last point, really, I think it's great that men are getting those second opinions. And as you say, the retired GP that 15Square is very lucky to have, he's avoided countless unnecessary non-therapeutic circumcisions that are just a result of almost lazy doctors or ignorant doctors just not being aware of more conservative treatments and just going with what they think is right. And I'm not sure why it's acceptable with circumcision, but it seems to be perfectly acceptable, and no one seems to question why this treatment is being used when there are far more conservative treatment options. We know there are, but this is something that's hopefully slowly going to change, and being given opportunities like the internship with 15Square, you're educating at least 10 people per year in more conservative treatment options. And the more that we can tell other people, and we do present to other people and spread the 15Square and the wider message, hopefully we can have some influence on future practitioners.
It's great to hear. I've really enjoyed the student placements. They're very keen. We've had some over 10 years. We've met quite a few of them, and it's really great to hear the talk and the feedback that actually comes back from the staff at Keele, because they go back really enthusiastic at their placement, and it's just lovely to hear. And long may this continue. I hope that we'll continue with this scheme or Keele will continue with this scheme for quite some time. But thank you very much indeed for speaking out, and I hope that we keep in touch, and certainly when you practice, it'll be nice to hear how you're going on with, and if you were able to do any more research in this area. But thank you indeed for everything you're doing for us.
No problem.